Hey guys, for my final project I decided to do a PowerPoint presentation on John Brown. John Brown was a man who lived from 1800 to 1859 and was known for being a zealous abolitionist. He has many names, some of them being Old Brown and Oswatomi Brown. He is best known for his antics in Kansas and Harper's Ferry and how he believed he was justified by God to abolish slavery by force, even murdering. In this project, we will be looking at John Brown's life and the situation that could have led him to take these drastic actions in the name of Christ. Since the death of Christ, there have been many individuals who use the Lord to justify their actions. They state that their will is the will of the Lord's, and this justifies anything they do. This can be seen in three different individuals from the past. In 2,000 Years of Christ's Glory by Nick Needham, he talks about the Pope Urban II and his actions at the Council of Clermont in 1095 AD. In short, he convinced the whole council to go in the First Crusade. He even got the council to shout, "Dos volt, dos volt," which means God wills it, God wills it. This, of course, would lead to great animosity between Muslims and Christians for years to come. The second example is Thomas Montso in 1524. He helped to ignite the Peasants' Revolt in Germany after the Reformation of Martin Luther. By taking a more radical break from the church, he was able to help lead thousands of peasants to unjust death. The third was Robert Louis Steer Jr., who in 2015 believed that he was on a crusade from God to destroy the evils of abortion and decided to attack an abortion clinic. He felt justified to do this because of the atrocities that were going on in that clinic. However, would the Lord want us to return evil for evil? All three of these examples help to show that John Brown is not the only individual to believe that God justifies their atrocities. As Christian historians, we have to sometimes look at the complicated issues which will continue until the Lord returns. John Brown was born on May 9th, 1800, to Owen and Ruth Brown in Torrington, Connecticut, and was one of 8 children. Both of his parents were committed Puritan Calvinists. This was even shown in his believed genealogy. In John Brown's The Making of a Martyr by Robert Warren, it mentions how John Brown's genealogy was rumored to begin in America with Peter Brown, who came over on the Mayflower. The zealous Puritan beliefs were in him from his birth. John was an energetic child who from an early age began to herd cattle and learn how to tan animal pelts. His mother passed away when he was only 8 years old in December 1808, but didn't seem to affect him much. John first saw slavery when he was 12 years old and was asked to assist with a cattle drive. While eating at the table that night, he saw a slave the same age as himself, who was being beaten before the guest with an iron shovel. He was also barely wearing any clothes in the cold weather and had no lodging. In John Brown, Making of a Martyr by Robert Warren, he states, John declared war on slavery from that point forth. John's life continued to be focused on the Lord, as James Hamilton and John Brown states. Through the influence of family training, he very early on became a convert to Christianity, and ever after a firm believer in the divine authenticity of God. Through this strong foundation from his family, John began to think about seminary. However, with the disease in his eyes and his own tanning business becoming profitable, he decided that this wasn't the route the Lord wanted for him. The second instance that gave him animosity towards slavery came when he was sharing a cabin with a friend in his late teens. A runaway slave came to their home to hide one night, and John, feeling empathy for him, let him in and tried to hide him. That night, however, men came to find the slave. John decided to help him escape through a window. However, he was captured. Brown, seeing this unjust treatment of another human being, swore again for eternal enmity against slavery. In 1820, John was married to for the first time to Diantha Lusk, and the following year she bore him their first son, John Brown Jr. John showed his devout leadership for Christ by leading his family every morning in the reading of the Bible and showed his reverence for Christ in the Sabbatarian view. His hatred of disobedience is illustrated in John Brown's Sword in the Word by Barry Stavis, who states John Jr., saying that in his childhood, for disobeying mother, we received 8 lashes. For unfaithfulness at work, 3 lashes. The Brown family would eventually move to Pennsylvania, where Diantha would bear him a couple more children. In 1831, John experienced losses in his life when his 4-year-old child Frederick died, and in the following year he lost his wife and his newborn infant son. John knew his children needed a mother and married for a second time to Anne Day in 1833, who was only 16. Between both wives, they would bear him 20 children. Through these challenging times, he stayed committed to the raising his family in reverence for the Lord and always keeping Psalm 127 close to his thoughts. In 1837, the Presbyterian minister Elijah P. Lovejoy was murdered by pro-slavery individuals. This caused John Brown to make his famous quote, which is recorded in a John Brown read by Louis Ruggmas. John rose at the back of a local church meeting and raised his right hand and stated, "Here before God in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." As the years passed, John Brown was more enamored with the continuing problems with new states and whether they should be free or not. This was on the back of his mind until another family tragedy struck in 1843 when dysentery came to his home and he lost 4 of his children. However, his faith in Christ remained strong, as noted in To Purge This Land with Blood by Stephen Oates, when John states, "God has seen fit to visit us with this pestilence, and 4 of our number sleep in the dust." The rest of the 1840s and early 1850s were filled with failed business endeavors by Brown. Through all these failures, he continued to be enamored with the western states, and with the passing of the Fugitive Slave Law Act in 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. It moved John Brown to relocate out to Kansas to support the freedom of the state. The Kansas-Nebraska Act is a truly interesting part of our American history. However, in short, it was run by popular sovereignty, which I believe they found out was not an effective way to try to establish law or states. The act permitted the people living in those territories to vote whether they wanted slavery or not. This quickly turned into people from both sides killing someone that they didn't agree with to lessen their voting numbers. This scenario was perfect for John Brown, who often quoted Hebrews 9:22. In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness of sins, which is stated in John Brown's Raid on Harper's Ferry in American History by Conrad Stein. On the night of May 24th, 1856, John Brown murdered 5 pro-slavery settlers, helping to earn Kansas the name Bleeding Kansas or Bloody Kansas, and John Brown the infamous name Osawatomie Brown. However, in John Brown Making of a Martyr, it states that little-known fact is that along with the killing of 5 men, many horses were stolen from properties of the pro-slavery citizens that night. John could have been motivated to kill these men because of pro-slavery stance or because of their horses, something that is often overlooked when we talk about John Brown. Feeling the effects of Bloody Kansas, Brown decided to head back east where it would be safer for himself. As noted in John Brown's Potawatomi written by David Fuller, while back east, John was able to meet very influential abolitionists and important financial backers that would support him on his next great endeavor. Some of these individuals were called the Secret Six. On October 16, 1859, Brown led a group of 18 men on a raid against Harper's Ferry. His plan, as told in the Daily Dispatch, a Richmond, Virginia newspaper, was to start at Harper's Ferry and free all slaves of that town, then make his way south to eventually free all the slaves in the South. Whether this was feasible, we will never know. However, his plan quickly became unraveled, and the following day his attack was ironically put down by Robert E. Lee. Brown was held in prison until his death on December 2, 1859. And while in prison, he wrote letters to many different correspondents, and one of these letters, in the Life and Letters of John Brown, Liberator of Kansas and Martyr of Virginia, Brown notes his famous Hebrews passage, "Without the shedding of blood there is no remission of sin." Brown started to see himself as a man who would shed his blood for his sinful nation. In A Terrible Swift Sword by Paul Finkelman, it notes that while John was walking to his execution, he was asked if he was ready for death. He exclaimed, "I'm entirely ready. I feel no shame on account of my doom. Jesus of Nazareth was doomed in a like manner. Why should I not be? This statement was followed up by his most famous prophecy, which is recorded in John Brown, written by James Hamilton. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. Whether he knew it or not, in a little more than a year and a half, the deadliest war in America would begin. The question, as Christian historians, we need to ask, does his actions violate the sixth commandment, or are his actions justified because of trying to abolish slavery? As noted in Thor's Rescue of John Brown from History by Michael Meyer, states some Christians believing that John Brown was obeying the higher law of God's will by his actions, while there are other people that oppose this view. As stated in the Stand Spectator, Stan Virginia, that viewed his actions as heinous and something he will live in infamy for. In our course reading material by Knowles, he mentions many abolitionists who were effective, such as Theodore Dwight Weld, William Lloyd Garrison, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, and many more. All of these abolitionists wanted the end of slavery, but they all pursued their abolitionist goal in different ways. Does John Brown fall into this category of a Christian abolitionist or not? Oswald Villard writes in his biography 50 years after that we can understand the inhumane cruelty of his Kansas struggle when he murdered in cold blood innocent and helpless settlers. We can also understand the deep tenderness of his heart when at Harper's Ferry he prayed, I feel just as content to die for God's eternal truth on the scaffold as in any other way. What do you guys think? Can you understand Brown's actions as Oswald Villard does? Thank you for your time.